Welcome to Business as Unusual. This is the live stream where we explore the pressing issues and emerging trends reshaping our business landscape. I'm Kathy Steele, and I'm the CEO of Red Caffeine and your host today. For those of you that are not familiar with Red Caffeine, we are a growth consultancy, which means we build and execute go-to-market plans for ambitious mid-market organizations. Our work includes everything from brand repositioning and new product or service launches to tech enablement consulting. But most often, we're focused on building revenue generation systems that fuel long-term growth. Today's session is part 2 of our Revenue Reset series. So in July, we kicked things off with Kayla Portillo and Dana Kramer from the RC team, digging into how aligning marketing and sales supported by the right tech stack like CRM systems, automation tools, of course, AI, performance dashboards, really lay the groundwork for scalability and predictable growth. So in this session, we're going to tackling what comes next, really defining and winning blue chip clients, the high value accounts that drive real impact in your business. So today I'm joined by Scott Peterson. He's one of RC's strategic partners, and he's the author of the new book, Beyond the Founder Rainmaker. Scott works with us to assess where our clients are at in their sales journeys and helps us co-create the strategies, processes, and teams they need to scale successfully. Today's session is going to unpack what it takes to define your ideal client profile, which we'll refer to as ICP sometimes, or blue chip, depending on what we're talking about. And then we're going to be trying to align your team around that target to win more of the business that moves the needle. So let's get into it. Scott, welcome.
Thanks, Kathy.
Yeah, so glad to have you. I mean, this has been like, a passion of mine to be working with you. And we're so glad to be doing this and having this conversation today. So tell us a little bit about you, Carver Peterson. And then I would always love to hear something fun that's not in your professional bio.
Okay. Well, thanks for having me. I appreciate it. Yeah, a little bit about me. I've spent the last 10 years as the founder and sales strategist of Carver Peterson. I get the opportunity to partner with growth-minded entrepreneurs that are trying to build and grow and scale, and building a high-performing sales team is a really important piece of that puzzle, and one maybe they've struggled to put all those pieces together over the years. So really cool opportunity to work with so many dynamic people and interesting companies. My background, I grew up in Oregon, born and raised. Maybe the fun, interesting fact about me is that my career in sales started pretty early in life. I loved basketball. I thought I was going to be a professional basketball player, but I didn't quite grow tall enough, or maybe I should have put more hours into the gym. But I ended up my sophomore year in college at Oregon State. I found out that a kid quit the team, and so I started cold calling the coach, and I left 3 messages on his phone. He eventually called me back, and I got an opportunity to try out for the team. I walked on, I made it. I got to play in 1 game. I hit a 3. I've got a grainy old YouTube clip that I get to show my kids now, which is a lot of fun. So,
oh my gosh.
And then connecting those dots in between, I started working with an organization, a staffing firm. I was there for 13 years. I started as an inside seller. Worked all my way up to, leading several of their large operations that moved me from Boston to San Diego and eventually to Chicago. And so I've dedicated, 25 years to the profession of sales, and I just absolutely love the profession and think it's a beautiful and very respectful profession.
I love that. It really does kind of show the tenacity that you really have to have. Kind of started early. There's a lot of you get knocked down, get back up again sort of experiences in sales. So I think that is a perfect not on your bio talking point. So thanks for sharing that.
Yeah.
All right, let's start to get into today's session. I want to kind of start at kind of that macro level. So what are some of the, biggest indicators a company has a sales issue, maybe even before they realize that they have a sales issue?
Yeah, The outcomes, the revenue or profitability of the business is a lagging indicator. And so, that can kind of hide issues. And so, the real early signs, the warning signs are really around new business and the health of the pipeline and just overall new activity. And so if that gets light or in some cases non-existent, is where we've got some like real early indicators that growth and getting to that desired future state is going to become much more challenging. So really good visibility around like what new opportunities are coming and how they're advancing through the pipeline.
Yeah, so I feel like sometimes that comes fairly delayed before they, a leadership team sometimes acts on that information or really realizes, I've seen a lot of inflated pipelines in my career, maybe with deals that aren't super solid or, as we'll talk about, ideal. But what are some of the, you work with a lot of different leaders. What are some of the most frequent blind spots that you see when you're getting started with an organization?
It's a great question. Yeah, so the blind spots that I see in these organizations often is the executive leadership like really doesn't have the clarity or visibility of the pipeline. And so to your point, there are so many CRMs that I would just refer to as dusty. Like you open them up, you open the CRM up and you just start asking questions. I would move from, in that Kanban view, like right to left, like those that are closest to closing. And so there is always a absolute pile of opportunities that are sitting there at waiting answer or like contract signing. And you start asking questions one by one and realize that that's been sitting there for, not weeks, but months and sometimes quarters. And when you start asking questions about, okay, like what's the closed loop? Like when is our next actual date to interact with that prospect and customer? There's open loops all over the place. And so activity one with so many of these organizations is let's open up the CRM. Let's see what's real. I'll give the sales team the appropriate amount of time to secure closed loops. And then, so let's call it 2 to 4 weeks. And at the end of those 2 to 4 weeks, anything that doesn't have a closed loop gets moved out. And you immediately have visibility into what the real pipeline, the active pipeline, really looks like. It is a leader's absolute nightmare, right? Because there's some comfort in this big pipeline number. Right. But the reality is they've got these weighted pipelines where, 90% that are in waiting answer are going to close and 70% that are proposal. It's all garbage, quite frankly, until you clean that entire thing out. And so kind of like back to that first question, like what are the biggest indicators a company's having issues in sales but don't know it yet? It's really just the health of that sales pipeline.
Yeah, I'm curious to ask because we find that many clients, big and small, it is not a revenue situation. It's really big and small organizations that don't have a really solid use of a CRM. Like they have a CRM, and I'll hear things like, "Oh, well, we're using Salesforce, but that's not where the data is going to be at. It's really going to be here." Or we're not using a CRM and we're keeping the data. Are you seeing similarity in terms of data hygiene and even using a CRM? Not just add data, it's just kind of lack of adoption of those kinds of tools.
Yeah. 10 years ago, a lot of the companies that I was interacting with, like, I don't know, maybe 50-50 had a CRM versus not. Now, almost every company that I see at least has something in place there.
Yeah.
But, in terms of how they're using it effectively, it's quite poor. Not all opportunities go in, a lot of the opportunities aren't necessarily being tracked. And one of the things that I think is really, really important is, and we can talk about this more later, but like defining your proven sales process and then having your CRM match exactly to those
Exactly.
stages.
Yeah.
So CRMs are designed in ways where it's almost is allowing the right word or promoting the right word. The CRMs are set up where there's these internal stages that almost kind of promote this open loop. And what I want from salespeople are closed loops at each incremental stage of the process so you can stay connected to your prospect, taking control of the sale, maintaining control of sale, and ultimately moving them through to close. Even if it's not a closed one, it's better than a no answer,
Right.
just to eliminate the ghost. So back to the original question, CRM utilization is poor, and a lot of the business owners, maybe it's because, and I hear this in some cases, that they don't want to micromanage, so they're really hands off in the visibility of the CRM, and so they're lacking really important data and allowing some of that bad data hygiene.
Yeah. No, I 100% agree. I do feel like there's more people utilizing these tools, but I don't see the adoption increase to, real usability. So let's really start to laser in on like ideal prospecting. So let's start by just the question of what are some of the signs a company is chasing the wrong prospects. I think you alluded to it a bit in the pipeline discussion, but are there some other signs that we should be looking at that we're just going after the wrong leads?
What are the signs that a company's pursuing the wrong prospects? I would immediately start looking at the alignment and fit of the prospects that are moving through. So, you'd mentioned earlier blue chip and ideal client profile. Like, I want to have that ideal client profile crystal clear. And then as prospects are coming into the funnel, I want to be able to match up those prospects to that ideal client profile. Like, are they a blue chip fit or are they not? And if the majority of opportunities that are coming in are a fit, then we know that we've got sales and marketing and farming efforts that are really aligned to profile. If there's a mismatch, if more opportunities that are coming in are misaligned, then we know we've got some problems happening somewhere in the top of funnel.
Yeah.
The other thing that I would be really interested in is, what does the conversion look like? So are we able to advance these prospects from qualification to discovery to proposal to final proposal review and get a final answer? And if those prospects aren't moving through, like just diving deeper, getting curious as to like what is the bottleneck? Is it a mismatch in who we're pursuing? Is there something that we're doing in those key stages that are keeping us from moving forward? But obviously getting your outbound and inbound activities matched to profile becomes critical.
Yeah, I know. I think that's a really interesting thing. I know there's something that we do internally that we, in the sales process, we're kind of red flagging things or green flagging things around the prospect kind of intake process and against what things that are real retention criteria for us for keeping a client. And so we have a long standing relationship with the majority of our clients, but it really is boiled down to certain key things that we see early signs in the sales process. So I think some of that, like, don't stop at the sale. Really pay attention, and we'll talk a little bit about, how to identify those blue chips, but really talk about how do companies start building an intentional sales strategy?
Well, the place that I start with the companies that I get the opportunity to work with, or what I would recommend business owners do on their own, is just to start to examine their historical data. And what I would recommend, we've actually got a slide prepared for this, but I would recommend that they grab some, recent years of client data and start to really look at the revenue patterns. And what I've found over and over and over again is that 80-20 rule, the Pareto principle, showing up over and over again. I've got 8 of my recent clients here that give you a pretty good handle on this quickly. It's it's 20% of clients driving on average 82% of revenue. And like this information to me is extremely valuable, right? Like who are the clients that are contributing so much? And then if you move to the next slide, this is probably the one that's more surprising to a lot of the business owners, is that it's the bottom 50% of their clients that are generating only single digits, right? So in this particular example, it's just 5% of total revenue. So looking at this, like understanding this data is so valuable, because you can start to really look at your maybe the top 5% of clients versus the top 20 versus the bottom 50, and you start to really see different characteristics come to life. There's different demographics of clients. There's different psychographics of clients. Obviously, there's different investment, and like really understanding like who is your best client inside of this this revenue or profit distribution becomes so important. But the $1 million question, and if you move to the next slide, is this: how are you allocating your time? So, you know, if the revenue distribution pattern is one thing, but you know, if you're just distributing time evenly across that entire grid, then there's a lot of slippage, there's a lot of wasted time. Versus, are we really, really intentional? Have we figured out exactly who our ideal clients are? And are we ensuring that we're putting our focused time and attention to retain those clients, to win more of those exact clients? Are we making sure that we're putting our best resources on those types of clients and prospects? And are we continuing to invest dollars, like the real important investment dollars, into winning, retaining, and growing more of those types of clients? So starting with data and really understanding it specifically for your own business, to me, is such a critical starting point.
Yeah, I feel like, this is really the most surprising, or the aha moments in talking with clients and talking them through this historical information. I know for, in my experience, there's a lot of people that want to hold tight on to that, those lower end of the spectrum sales opportunities. And I think, like, to your point, you say that they don't always come up as a bad customer. It's just how you treat that customer. Could you add in automation or e-commerce or other, lower cost ways to service those clients? Because, they may have a good year and take you right along with it. So they may become one of those ideal, or higher volume customers at some point.
Yes. Yeah, I don't want to. So if we go back one slide, I think it's a great point, Kathy. I'm not suggesting that this bottom 50 or this bottom 5% of revenue or bottom 50% of clients is necessarily a bad thing. To your point, it might be automated. It might be, just super simple, no noise, nothing. And that's great. I've seen it be where, clients have extremely messy, noisy, frustrating, clients that are in this bottom 50% that are just really negatively impacting the business.
Yeah.
And even worse, sales and marketing efforts that are pushing more prospects just like them into the funnel, occupying precious time and bandwidth of the sales organization.
Yeah, absolutely. So talk us through, how you start to help a client laser in on who is your best fit.
Great. So I've got a slide for that too. And just to kind of tee it up, as an early seller, I was trying to figure out how to be efficient and effective. And, it wasn't that simple. I had a big territory. I had 1,000 prospects that I could pursue. And I really started pursuing those prospects, A through Z, or 1 through 1,000 on the list. And it wasn't getting the job done, to the point where my role, my career was at risk. And so I had to figure out ways to be more efficient. And ultimately, I came up with a checklist that was really helpful for me. And I knew if I could get a prospect that checked all 6 boxes, or 5 of the 6, that I was going to be like locked on that prospect. And maybe if it was a 4, it was still worthy of being on the list, and anything 3 or below got pushed off. And that was really, really helpful to me early in my career. And then when I started Peterson 10 years ago, I had to come up with a really simple model that was applicable across a range of industries and fit for companies. And this 2x2 model came to life. There's two axes that give it its shape. On the vertical, you see financial alignment, and this is really black and white. What I'm trying to figure out here is like, what is the ideal investment? What's the ideal offering? What's the initial offering? Maybe what's the lifetime value? What's the profitability? There's different ways that we can bring financial data into this and kind of pick a number that allows us to determine, are they financially aligned or not? Horizontally is cultural alignment. That one's much more gray. There's a lot more to unpack here. But what I'm trying to figure out is, is this the type of organization that we really want to invest in? Right? Is this the client that we really want to partner with? Is this the prospect that we really want to partner with? And some of those things are like, is there values alignment? Like, do they want and need what we're about? So if we're a premium provider, do they value a partner versus a vendor? Do they value expertise? Are they willing to, take our recommendations and act on them? Or are they just going to tell us exactly what to do and how high to jump? And so this alignment of organizational values becomes such an important thing in defining this 2x2 grid.
Yeah, I 100% agree. I think that over time, we've, personally really refined cultural alignment. There's definitely ways that we work best with clients. There's characteristics that need to be in place at their leadership team level. It's highly valuable, but it is nuanced far more than the financial alignment. That's to your point, very black and white.
When we get those two things together, financial alignment and cultural alignment is where we get our blue chip client profile. So if you move to the next slide, blue chip these are your best clients. When we've examined your historical data, these are the ones that jump off the page. They tend to be your highest revenue and most profitable clients. They're the ones that stay with you, that grow with you, that recommend you and refer you. Your team loves working with them and vice versa. Right? So if we're going to really grow as an organization, it becomes critical that we retain these types of clients. So our customer success and account management strategy has to be built around these types of clients. And then from a business development standpoint, sales and marketing efforts have to be zeroed in, focused on winning and growing more of these blue chip clients.
Yeah, 100%.
Cool. Let's fill out the rest of the box. So if we move to the next slide, clients that are aligned financially but misaligned culturally are what I refer to as dirty money. When I was naming these boxes 10 years ago, I was trying to figure out the appropriate name, and I didn't love the name dirty money, but it's funny, it's been probably the most memorable name of all. And I think all of us can probably call up or imagine a client that was definitely surpassing our financial expectations, but was just really, really, really challenging to work with. And I've heard a lot of organizations over the years say they value people over profits, and these clients are really the litmus test for that, right? This is where we really have to put our money where our mouth is. And granted, there's things that we can do to enculturate dirty money clients. And I'm not suggesting that we disqualify dirty money prospects, but I want to be able to identify some of those red flags and warning signs early so we can address them and so we can make decisions internally and gain alignment before we determine to invest in these types of prospects.
Yeah, I love this part of the process because I feel like everybody puts their, highest value clients in the blue chip box. And then all of a sudden we start talking about dirty money and they're like, oh, okay, let's move them a little closer to dirty money. Or it is just such a funny experience to sit back and see the team kind of unearth and talk about, those aspects that really move them left in the 2x2.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, let's keep moving forward in the graph. So make it count. So these are clients that aren't meeting your financial expectations, but they're aligned culturally. It's a good, easy fit. And so let's see, there's some complexity to this. One, salespeople are notorious for saying it's going to start small and it's going to grow into something much bigger. And all too often, they don't. And when they don't, this occupies precious time, resources, bandwidth, and it erodes the margins of an organization. So in certain cases, it absolutely makes sense to win and engage with make it count clients. All I'm asking for is that we have a plan for it. What is our plan to make it grow into a blue chip client? What's our plan to build off and around that? Maybe there's an important case study or penetration into a new geographic market or segment that's going to allow us to grow. Or maybe this client gives us an opportunity to start like productizing new offerings or innovate in ways that are really dynamic, or maybe even put some of our more junior people with that account. So there's some real positive things here. And you know, I'm again not saying disqualify, but we can't have an entire roster of clients that are sitting in that make it count bucket.
Yeah, I do. I love that ideation around how to either move them up in the 2x2, or think about how to service them in a different way so that, you know, you are still keeping sort of that mid-tier of revenue, and without, you know, without kind of eliminating that, because there are some people that could move up, or you could service them in a more profitable way and make that, you know, kind of distribution of revenue more impactful for your business overall.
It's a great point. I've seen some organizations do that really, really well, where it might not hit revenue target, but it's become a much more profitable type of engagement or client. And that's perfect, right? How do we make the most of it? And obviously it needs to be a win-win relationship. Cool. Then let's get to the last box. And this one to me is so critical. You know, so if blue chip was my number one box that I wanted to find and really identify the center of the bullseye, graveyard is you know, the mirror opposite of that. Like how do we start to understand what we don't want? You know, what are the off limit markets? What are the red flags and disqualifiers that we're just looking to avoid and disqualify at all costs? There's a really interesting article that HBR put out years ago, titled "It's Time to Fire Some of Your Clients." The headlines are maybe a little bit too much of a attention grabber, you know, but the reality is, you know, the article gets to the point. In most cases, when I sit down with a business and we're kind of working through their revenue distribution or profit distribution, and we get to this 2x2, they start putting names of clients in this bottom left box. Like as we start to define the characteristics, there's logos that are showing up here. And these are clients that are not meeting financial expectations. And in some cases in the red, we're losing money and definitely putting their team at risk and their reputation at risk, right? Internal employees are quitting or like really unhappy in their jobs because they're having to serve these misaligned clients. And these are the types of clients that end up saying things negatively in the marketplace or on not job boards, but review boards, you know, and damaging the brand. And so, you know, to me, the only thing worse than investing time in a graveyard prospect is turning them into a client, right? I want to avoid these at all costs. And it's also important to acknowledge that one person's graveyard is another person's blue chip. Like, I'm not saying these are bad people, bad businesses, bad anything. It's just not the fit to your organization.
Yeah. And I mean, I love to having, you know, in a business, having optionality to refer out business to somebody that isn't a fit for you. I think that is, you know, it's just the right way, if you can, to be able to say, this isn't really a fit for our organization, but, you know, we can make some introductions for you to somebody that might be more aligned with your spend or your needs or what have you. So, you know, also thinking about that in the sales process.
I love that. Awesome. So let's move to the next slide. And so here we've got all four on there together. And so when it comes to sales strategy, and this is really where the question began, like how do we really like refine and zero this thing in? What I see all too often is that the aim the focus is just really like right at the center of that 2x2. And so what you end up getting is kind of this even distribution into these 4 boxes. It's a bit of a shotgun spray or scattered approach. And so, maybe we get, 25% blue chip and 25% graveyard. And, you just kind of get a lot of this stuff. And we know, and I'm one of them, salespeople aren't great at disqualifying. We want to move things through. We want to close deals. And so whatever we get our hands on, like we're going to try to make that thing work. What I'm suggesting and recommending and ultimately refining and defining and teaching is that we take that blue chip profile and we move our aim up into the right. And so it's not blue chip exclusive. I want to make that point clear. This isn't a blue chip or bust strategy. But if we can move that aim up into the right, instead of a 25% distribution in each of those boxes, maybe we've minimized graveyard down to 5 or 10%. Maybe we've been able to move blue chip to 35 or 40 or even 50%. And so we're just getting more cracks. This is a quality over quantity approach. This is a highly focused, highly targeted approach. This isn't buying a list of 1,000 leads. I would so much rather have 5 or 10 or 25 prospects that I know meet all of the criteria of our blue chip client profile. And anything that falls in between in that dirty money or make it count, like those end up being opportunities that I would just call proceed with caution. Let's identify the flags and let's move forward and continue to have questions and internal discussion and make decisions internally if this is where we want to invest our time, talent, and treasure.
Yeah, I love it. I think, I love the idea of really understanding what your current client makeup looks like in this kind of a matrix, because then you can have an action plan for account changes or different things you're doing in your retention process to move somebody from dirty money or make it count up a little bit or closer to that blue chip. How do you, change up your focus on a graveyard? But I like the idea of trying to minimize those relationships, if at all possible. And I don't think that businesses, in my experience, really are thinking about their sales in this capacity. So I think this is just brilliant.
That's cool. Yeah, it is applicable to both business development and then also account management, as you mentioned, right? So the exercise after really defining these 4 boxes is taking your existing clientele and power ranking them into the 4 boxes. Yeah. And so immediately you have this prioritization, with blue chip, okay, these are the clients that we need to retain. And how are we going to invest our best resources there? And maybe that means leadership's involvement with those clients. If it's dirty money, okay, what do we need to do to enculturate these clients? If it's make it count, how do we grow them? And if it's graveyard, what's our plan? Are we going to move them up, in, or out?
Right. So I think, this information is so invaluable, but there's also that level of creating more detail around the personas or the characteristics. So, talk us through how you start to take this intel into and really narrow it down. So you've got buying triggers and more demographic information about how to target these blue chip clients.
Yeah, and I think we might have a slide for that too.
Yeah.
So, the pieces, there's really 4 components to the blue chip profile, to really all of those profiles. And investment being one of them, as we had already talked about, the demographics and psychographics, and then trigger events. And so, the investment, it helps by examining, your historical data, as we'd already talked about, and figuring out like, okay, like these are our best clients and they're generating X, revenue, profitability, whatever is your most important metric. Like that to me becomes the North Star for that line, right?
Yeah. Let me ask you a little bit of a question around, how do you assess investment? Because I think when I think of investment, I'm thinking, what they're willing to invest in your service offering or your product offering, right? Now, do you feel that annual revenues is the best indicator of the feasibility of investment, or what other things would you be thinking about in terms of what makes somebody, as you're prospecting and knowing little about them, what are some of the characteristics that you would, look at that could help you understand their willingness to invest, I guess?
Yeah. So let's see here. The investment box for me is it takes two important roles. One is as a seller, I've got an understanding of like what our ideal engagement looks like or what our ideal sale looks like.
Right.
So I know for this to be one of our best customers, they need to, their initial order needs to be X or their commitment needs to be Y. It needs to be greater than this. And we know that this is where we want our client relationships to start. So that to me is the investment box. It's like direction for the seller on what it is that we need to be selling. And we've determined that those that are north of that are going to be our best customers and stay with us and get the most value from our relationship. How I know that they're willing to make that type of investment is where we would start to get into like our most common demographics. Based on our historical data, we found that the companies that make this type of investment are, this size of headcount and this mature in terms of, how long they've been around, or this much revenue, or, this geographic location plays an important role, or experiencing, certain headcount growth, or the departments of a certain size. Like those would be some of the characteristics. What's that analogy? If it looks like a duck and walks like a duck and quacks like a duck, it's probably a duck. It's the same thing here. Like I'm not suggesting that just because a company's of certain revenue that it means that they're going to be financially aligned.
Okay.
But it helps.
Yeah, I love that clarification, because I think that this is it, even when you're looking at, historical success in your sales data, it's sometimes very, we're working lots of industries. We've got a lot of different buyer types. We're selling into a lot of different decision makers. So I think those are the nuances, especially when you've got a bit smaller data set, that you really have to start keying in on.
Yeah. Yeah. And if there is a smaller data set, or the company's maybe newer and doesn't have all that, historical, to me, it's in pencil instead of pen, but I still get tight. I think too many organizations stay broad and are scared to get more niche and like commit to it. And so I would rather be as tight as I can be and then just get more data points. And those data points might iterate our ideal client profile some, but to me, that's a more effective route rather than just casting the wide net.
I 100% agree.
So we got investment, and again, like to me, that's direction to seller and marketing of like, these are the types of organizations that we're looking for and where we want them to start and end up. The demographics are the things that I can filter and search, so if I'm going and targeting, blue chip prospects, I can put all of those pieces in. And I'm, again, not looking for a list of 1,000 or even 100. I want like 5 or 10, and then I can loosen the filter and then get to 25 and then loosen it and get to 50. And obviously we can continue to loosen and modify so we can have more opportunities to pursue that target. But like, I want that type of focus. And then, the psychographics, those are much harder to find early. Those are things that will be learned over time. And there are things that I'm looking for and sizing up during qualification meeting 1 and discovery meeting 2 and proposal presentation. And then obviously once they become clients, you learn a whole heck of a lot more. And then the last piece of the profile is the trigger event. And this is the one I feel that gets left off the most, but it's probably, it's the X factor to it, because it brings in the timing. So, now not only are you knocking on the right door and ideally on the right person's door with the right messaging, but you're knocking on it at the right time. And so this analogy is kind of a goofy one, but my wife and I have 3 kids now, and so if I was a minivan salesperson, the trigger event to sell minivans would be a positive pregnancy test for baby number 3. Not the
Right.
baby, like it's not the like external baby that's in the world. It would be, whatever it is, 8 months earlier, where you find out that you're going to be looking for a third row and need an extra car seat. And so like that's when you start shopping. That's when you start noticing ads. That's when you start seeing these other minivans on the road and consider it. So what is the trigger event for your best prospects? Like, is it change in leadership? Is it a ownership event or fundraising or a new contract or geographic expansion? If we can find those things out, and there are ways to find those things out, now we're really zeroed in.
Right.
And like that to me is so impactful when it comes to like really effective pursuit of blue chip prospects.
Yeah, I think that, even in terms of targeting, but as well as talking to your network who may be referring opportunities to you, I find it really valuable to share those kind of triggering events, because then when they're out networking or they're talking with a customer or prospect and they hear something, they're willing to introduce you, and then vice versa in terms of that collaborative sales process. I think those are the things that not everyone gets to hear, firsthand. A lot of times that information can come through, your channel or your network of people that are out in the selling landscape as well.
I agree. Yeah, the indirect sale is such an important one, and we can tie it in here really easily. So, like I've been forever relying on like a really important group of strategic partners. Well, the strategic partners that I'm building relationships with sure better have blue chip clients as their clients.
Right.
If there's a mismatch, then it's not going to work out very well. But what's really important is that we're able to communicate with clarity demographics, psychographics, and to your point, the trigger events like bring it to life. Like, oh, the more specific you can be, like, well, actually, I do know someone that's going through that thing, and you're really looking for one introduction, not
Exactly.
a whole bunch of them.
Right.
So getting this zeroed in makes the referral part of your business development strategy so much more effective too.
100%. All right. Well, I think the last piece on the list was really talking about value messaging. Could you touch on that just for a few minutes?
Yeah. So, to take the sales strategy further, once you get your blue chip client profile defined, the next piece is like, who are the key stakeholders involved in the buying decision? CEB, or now Gartner, has done so much beautiful research over the years. And the book, The Challenger Customer, is one that really like kind of gets into the key stakeholder group. And they found, whatever it was, 2014, that there were 5.4 buyers involved in the decision-making process. And so that said, like, who are those buyers? Who are those key stakeholders inside of your blue chip prospect? And ultimately, what do they care about, right? So what we know is that like each of those people have different jobs, they have different responsibilities, they're measured different, paid different, promoted differently, fired differently, have different problems and desired positive gains. And so they care about different things. Us in sales and marketing, if we're trying to pique interest and gain connection and start a conversation with those folks, like what we do adds value. Otherwise, we probably wouldn't be in business.
Right.
So like we have our own unique offerings and our comparative differentiators, and like how we message that to this different stakeholder group, to me, really, really matters. And so, if I'm reaching out to someone in operations versus someone in finance, the way that I would tailor messaging would differ. And so the steps to it: blue chip client profile, figure out exactly who the key stakeholders are. And again, we could do this by examining historical data and figuring out point of entry. and examining who was involved in the decision-making process to figure out like who is our 5.4, and that
Right.
number's grown, especially in more complex deals. And then like doing the persona work, like, all right, what does my person in ops really care about? What's their job? How are they measured? What are their problems that they're experiencing? What are their desired outcomes? And then examining our business. Like what are our products and services, and how are we better, and how are we different? And then ultimately, how do you connect those two things? So my outreach messaging to operations should hit on different points than the person in finance. And so
Yeah.
that slight tailoring, we might be pursuing the same organization and we might be offering the same offering, but there's nuance to how we would ultimately communicate that.
Yeah, I feel like the buying process is fairly complex these days, and there's a lot of people involved, especially in larger ticket sales. So really understanding who, is involved and personalizing that message to each of those buyer personas or stakeholders is ultimately important. I want to talk a little bit about systemization. So, I mean, obviously, that is core to our belief is really building a revenue generation system, something that's reliable and scalable. As part of that, you really champion the idea of a playbook, a sales playbook. Can you talk a bit about, why and the value of creating a sales playbook?
Yeah. Where do I even start with this? I grew up with an organization that scaled from two guys in a basement to an international multi-billion-dollar company. And it was a machine. I don't know how else to say it, and you could, I started my professional career in Boston, and then worked in San Diego and Chicago. The offices looked the same. They smelled the same. They acted the same. The process was the process was the process. And as soon as I left that organization and got my hands on scaling up and traction and all those, like, I was like, oh, this was us. Like, this is exactly who we
Yeah.
were as an organization. It was like having the blueprints to scale. And so what I found, as I stepped into this world of growth-minded entrepreneurs that are wildly brilliant and super dynamic and doing really, really cool things, many of them sold as founders would sell, or many of them had high-performing sellers that were working a bit as lone wolves. And so there wasn't necessarily a repeatable thing. And when I would sit down with sellers and I'd say, tell me about your process, I'd get a lot of, well, sometimes, and it depends, and you name it. So the idea of building anything scalable, like a high-performing team, a consistent team, where the process was going to be the same regardless of who was leading it, it was just few and far between. And in order to build an organization that can grow, it has to be done in a repeatable and effective way. The playbook is the way to do it, right? And it starts to me with like getting that strategy piece really, really tight and refined, as we've already discussed, and then getting into the actual sales process itself, defining what good looks like at each incremental step of the process. So you can say, this is the purpose and goal of this stage, and the next step of our process is this. And then we just do that thing. If there's alignment and fit, we tell them, and then we secure the next step. And then we do that again and do that again and do that again until they give us a yes, a no, or a not yet.
Yeah, I feel like, this really played out for us recently. I had one of my executive sponsor conversations with a leader that we both have worked with, and something came up and I was able to tell the team like, hey, they're, really stuck. This is a sales issue. And because we have this sort of playbook repeatability in the process, we were able to quickly pivot and react to sort of a market trend that was going on, and come up with a plan to go after, unearthing some new opportunities in this space. So I think it is ideal. I do feel like I hear the same thing that you do. A lot of, even in larger sales organizations, well, this person does it this way, or where you've got teams that have been merged together through an acquisition, or something that has driven, this kind of different selling processes within the same team. Why do you feel like there's some pushback on actually creating this documentation? And and using it. Like it's one thing to create it, but it's another thing to actually implement it and tweak it and those types of things.
Yeah, I think there's just some skepticism that it'll work. And maybe a lot of the clients that I tend to work with that are more entrepreneurial, like they don't necessarily want the corporate rules or the repeat, you know what I mean? Like there's some things that have worked by being a bit more creative or fluid and flexible. And so, I think a lot of this to me is like evolving from founder-led sales to traditional sales. And it's a different playbook.
Yeah.
And for like building a traditional team, like there has to be clarity and there has to be repeatability. Otherwise, you're just going to have all these inconsistencies and you're going to have some people perform and some people not.
Well, I feel like, this raises just this larger macro trend with this, transfer of wealth that will be happening so prolifically in our world with many leaders aging out of the workforce. And the thing that creates so much value in your organization is a sales playbook, is a true revenue system. And so I challenge, that, kind of pushback, because I do feel like not only is it valuable to the organization as you're running it, it's going to be valuable and live on maybe post a founder-led sales strategy.
And it's interesting, that's one of the big trigger events that leads to this work, right? Is like,
Yes.
hey, for the first time, I'm really starting to think about exit.
Right.
And it typically is coupled with growth and exit. And so, recognizing that that the business can't be overly reliant on, one or a handful of sellers. There has to be more of a methodology in place that kind of removes that and makes the organization more valuable. And it's a repeatable playbook that's effective, still winning blue chip clients, that's going to make that business all the more desirable.
Yeah. Well, if somebody is thinking about acquisition, get with Scott and I, and we'll help you mature your sales and marketing function before you do so. So, Scott, I want to wrap this up with one final question. I mean, you've worked with hundreds of founder-led companies. When you look back, is there really one common sales or growth mistake that you see that people are making over and over again? And if you could share like an actual story that has kind of happened when a founder stepped back and really made a change in their organization.
Yeah.
I know it's hard to boil it down to one thought, right?
Yeah. The biggest mistake is just like the lack of clarity and focus and rigor and discipline to the strategy. And so I just see over and over again this wide net, and it just kind of starts to deflate the brand and it deflates the roster of clients, and so it's clarity and focus that is so important in this pursuit of growth. In terms of the clients that I've partnered with over the years, there's quite a few that are coming to mind in this. One in particular, was an organization that had a couple brothers at the helm. One was really the rainmaker in terms of bringing so much business in, and they recognized that it was just so critical that they were able to start building out this high performing team. And so maybe they transitioned a little earlier than they thought they would or could. They put a lot of trust in the right person to kind of take the reins of the organization. And like that person got to be a part of building the playbook, right? So, executive leaders, owners of the company, and a couple key stakeholders that were going to play a key role in the pull through and execution of the work. And what they ended up seeing, and this is a really common thing, is like so much understanding, like a deeper understanding of what goes into a sales strategy, and then so much conviction around their process. They they developed their process kind of incremental step by step, and putting in like what was really valuable to their organization in terms of like how they demonstrate expertise through questions, and maintaining control of the sale from step to step, and ultimately like drilling into the business case that was the right information to unearth through their discovery process. And they left with just like a ownership, buy-in, conviction, and a playbook that others could execute. And the company started seeing growth that they hadn't seen before.
Yeah.
Winning deals that were larger because there were more of the right opportunities coming through. Winning those opportunities at a higher clip, because again, we were like really centered and really focused on that blue chip client profile. And then the velocity was moving quicker too. Like we had prospects that were actually moving stage to stage and closing with the discipline of closed loops. And so, just a real powerful example of when you get strategy and process and structure all really aligned together around this playbook.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I do feel like, people should not fear the process, because I think you can still be colorful and flavorful and put your own personality into, being who you are in sales. But you have a framework and tools that you can easily tap into, so you can do the fun stuff as a seller, and the hard administrative stuff is already sort of baked into the how you do the fun stuff. So I love hearing those success stories. I know that we both get a lot of joy out of working with these mid-market organizations and helping them go from here to here. It's a pretty exciting opportunity to do that day in, day out that we have. Scott, thank you so much for joining us today. It was, fabulous to talk to you, and I love your methodology. I'm so excited for more people to read your book, which is available on Amazon. So if you want to connect with Scott, please put business as unusual. We've shared his LinkedIn profile link. We've shared his email address. And we've shared the cover of his book, which we will definitely put a link to the book on Amazon. Is that the best place to purchase it, Scott, or is it available elsewhere? Okay, so we'll share out the link in all the follow-up materials and on our website, and I'm sure it's somewhere on the Peterson website as well. But again, thank you for joining us today. It was just really a pleasure.
Thanks, Kathy. I appreciate you and your team and being a partner. It's been great.
Thank you. All right, we're going to start to wrap up. First, we want to thank HR Source. They are the go-to resource for employers, from their HR hotline to their HR exchange. They've got a lot of company survey data so you can compare yourself to others. They've got great salary data. They've got expert legal services, and they also offer flexible fractional HR support. HR Source really helps organizations lead with confidence, and you can find out more about them at hrsource.org. You also want to give a big shout out to M3 Learning. So once you've got your blue chip profiles and your dirty money profiles and your playbook built, you may need some coaching and training for your sales team on proactive selling. So this type of training really transforms sales teams through skills building, creating more accountability, and lasting results. So M3 is really building these sales superstars, and you can find out more about them at m3learning.com. Next up, we are going to talk about uniting your brand and your people post M&A. So mergers are not just about the deal. They are really about the story you tell next. There's a lot of things that go into creating a deal and having it get closed. But it is really truly what the investors are investing in, and their market thesis as to what would happen next. And so today's marketplace is highly acquisitory, and that is driven by a lot of factors. organizations with strategic growth goals that are not going to just rest on organic growth, access to new capabilities, a geography, or maybe expanding the industries that somebody's able to serve. People are taking advantage of PE. There's a lot of capital available out there from PE firms. And then there's just increasing competitive pressure to offer more, give a more end-to-end solution. And so with that, alongside an aging workforce, this baby boomer workforce that will be transitioning their leadership roles and their organizations that they've been running for a long time over the next 5 to 10 years, there's just going to be a great transfer of wealth that's going to happen. So in this session, we're going to be joined by Marty Bonder. He is the general manager of Anchor Harvey, and we'll also bring in Amy Anderson. She's our VP of Client Services at Red Caffeine, and we're going to discuss the recent relaunch of the Anchor Harvey brand and go-to-market plan that followed the acquisition of 3 additional companies. So we're going to explore how that early brand planning can drive enterprise value, calm uncertainty. As you can imagine, there's a lot of changes that are going on. So a lot of uncertainty, both internally and externally. We're going to talk about how we aligned 4 different cultures and the acceleration of this integration to expand the external narrative of their more robust capabilities. So join us on September 18th. You are going to walk away with some real behind the scenes insights and just some great things if you're thinking about acquisition or a merger at all in your organization. So with that, I want to thank you for attending today and joining us for the Revenue Reset on Business as Unusual. This is part 2, as I mentioned. If you missed part 1, be sure to look for that. Really, today we focused on how to define and win those blue chip clients. Those are those most highly valuable, most profitable, and culturally aligned prospects. Scott shared a ton of insights on how to move beyond rainmaker, founder-led selling, and he is, really talking a lot about things that are in his recently released book, Beyond the Founder Rainmaker, Build Your Blue Chip Sales Strategy. You can find this book on Amazon.com. I really encourage you to read it. It's like super short, but packed with powerful information. But if you are ready to really rethink your revenue strategy, or you need help, building those foundational sales enablement tools, I'd love to talk to you. You can feel free to reach out to me directly or anybody on the Red Caffeine team. We'd love, to help you. So until next time, keep challenging what's possible and building the kind of business